unanimous consent that the amendment be considered read.
Without objection.
I'm going to spend a minute just talking about the Kerry amendment. I'm sitting over here listening to it, and there's no question he's right on what should happen in terms of notification on evictions. But we're about to make the same mistake we make all the time. That's a state issue. State laws apply. And we're going to pull that in and make it a federal issue now. Anybody that has any connection with any federal insurance, any FHA or anything else, we're going to now start writing the laws on contract law in my state, in his state, and every other state. That's exactly how we got in the trouble we are in today. So I hope the American people will look, how did we get where we are? We got where we are because we're putting our nose into states' business. And we think we have a nexus, no matter what the problem is, we ought to be solving it. Which means, why have state legislatures anymore? Why have governors? Why don't we just solve all the problems? Now to the amendment at hand. You cannot be help but be discouraged about the U.S. Congress. We have all these grand ideas and new programs to expand the size and scope of the federal government, but we never want to pull it back in when it's not effective and when it's not working. And so what do? We create a new program, or we renew a new authorization, not looking at the facts, not looking at the downside consequences of it. What we do is we just reauthorize it with a good goal in mind. Helping homeless people is a great thing for us to do. The McKinney-Vento Act has, in the past, made a great contribution to 250 homeless shelters in this country. But nobody pays attention to the fact that we spent $300 million and went through 30,000 properties to find 250 homeless shelters. The other thing that is not recognized is that we have all these pieces of property that we can't get rid of. It's actually 69,850 properties that the federal government owns that they're not using. Some of them need to be raised, but they're costing us billions every year to maintain because we have a bureaucracy that you can't get through to sell the property. Why? We've got $89 billion of cash sitting there right now. Right now, $89 billion, that's conservative appraisal values up to date, on properties that we could put that money into the federal treasury. That's $89 billion we wouldn't borrow against our grandchildren if, in fact, we had a common sense, cogent way to dispose of excess federal properties. And what all this amendment does is say, let's create a pilot program for 5 years. Let's offset anything 100,000 square feet and less, anything bigger, let's go around it. We're not going to have a 100,000 square foot homeless shelter. And let's incentivize the agencies to get rid of their property by leaving 20% of the money that they would get from selling those properties in the agency. The GAO says one of our biggest at-risk programs is our real property management. Peter Orszag testified in his hearings on confirmation. It is a giant problem. So now we come up with an amendment that is common sense. It's a pilot project. All it does is let's test it on a limited number of properties for 5 years and see if we can't move some of this property, can't lower the cost of government for the American people, and let's do it in a way that's smart. You know, we have over 10,000 properties that need to be razed, need to be torn down, that we're expending tons of money to guard or protect or to maintain in a small fashion that's absolutely being wasted. And yet this body doesn't want to do that. They don't want to approach a common sense approach. This doesn't do anything to homeless people. This doesn't take any opportunities away from them. There's a very set guideline in here on how they get to perform against the properties under the pilot project. But we're going to claim, because the homeless groups that support McKinney-Vento aren't happy with it, we're going to claim we can't do anything. So we're not going to accept this amendment. They're going to raise a point of order because it cost $20 million, but when the CBO scored it, they didn't count any of the value of the funds coming from selling the properties. It's a net gain of billions. And we're going to get a point of order, and why? Because we'd rather satisfy completely an interest group than do what's best for the country as a whole. We'd rather spend more money than save money. We'd rather look good in one area than protect the future in the long term. You can't read this amendment and not say it doesn't make common sense for us to be doing it. It's absolute common sense. And what the American people know better than we do is there's not much of that up here. Otherwise, we would have solved this problem 4 years ago when I started offering amendments on it. But we don't want to do it. We don't want to take on the established, connected lobbyists and interest groups that say, no, we don't want that to happen. We had an offer from the House to do 5 properties over 5 years. That was the offer from the House. 5 out of 69,000 properties? 69,000 pieces of property the federal government has that they want to get rid of, that we can't do it because we're afraid we might miss one opportunity to put a piece of property in the hands of good people who want to do the right thing for those less fortunate. And yet we sit here and we deny common sense. We deny the cost. Think, if we sold $89 billion worth of property, just compound that interest over what we're borrowing right now over the next 5 years. Think about how that could offset some of our difficulties today. Just if we just did half of it, what would happen? The first thing we do is the American people say, hey, they're starting to get it. They're starting to understand what we're going through, making priorities. The risk of missing an opportunity for a homeless shelter versus getting rid of a high-risk problem that this federal government has, not denying, but maybe missing one opportunity is small compared to how it's going to impact the future homeless people in this country, which are going to be our grandkids who are never going to afford to buy a home because we're strangling them with debt. So it'll be fine to challenge this on a point of order. I'll make a motion to waive the point of order. And we can have a vote in the Senate about whether we're going to do common sense things that actually help our kids and our grandkids at the same time we're helping the homeless, or we're going to say no. We're not going to do anything new. We're not going to do common sense. We're not going to apply what the ordinary man would do with their own money. We're just going to reject it. And the fact that this isn't even considered to be accepted in this bill is a statement about this body that's unbelievable. There's no legitimate complaint with this pilot program. The only complaint is those that lobby on the other side don't want it. Or the only complaint is we're afraid we won't get everything we want if you do that. This nation needs to learn right now, if we're going to get out of the problems, we're all going to have to sacrifice some. Everybody's going to have to sacrifice. And that means we can't have everything that we want. And so the very idea that we won't address this issue at this time on a housing when we have a big, large, overburdening problem with real property in the federal government says, what are we thinking about? Why does this not fit within the bounds of what we're supposed to be doing right now? Who are we going to hurt if we create a pilot program to get rid of properties over 100,000 square feet? How much money are we going to save just on maintenance every year? It has to be seen in the light of the whole picture, not just in the light of the homeless. And if we fail to do that, we fail to think about the long-term benefits that will come from having common sense real property reform. We ought to be doing this. We ought to be helping the next 2 generations rather than hurt. I'm reminded, I did 27 town hall meetings while we were on break. And I'll never forget, this guy came up to me and he said, I don't care what you do to me, quit hurting my children. Quit hurting my children. Not accepting this amendment hurts everybody's kids. It's money we could save if we wanted to, but we won't, because we don't have the backbone or the courage to do what is the best right thing for the country right now. We're going to do the political, I have no doubt, we'll do the politically expedient thing. We won't work on real property. We won't solve this big issue that costs us billions every year, just in maintenance costs. We'll do the easy thing. I'll have more to say about this as it's challenged on a point of order and also before the vote. But I hope my colleagues start becoming partisan for our kids, partisan for our children. We can help the homeless and help our kids too. We can help the homeless and create a better future for our kids. But we can't if we won't take a risk. So my challenge to my colleagues is at least look at the amendment and say, if it was my money, what would I be doing? And the fact is if it's your money, you wouldn't be sitting on $89 billion worth of property that's costing us billions every year to maintain that we're not using and that we can't get through the process to get rid of. With that, I yield the floor.
Madam President.
The senator from Rhode